everybody. Welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and I am indeed on the road here for a couple of days, so be patient with the publication of podcasts, if you will, but I didn't want to leave y'all hanging since the Vikings wrapped up minicamp. They have a couple of more OTA practices left to go, but for the most part, we have it all figured out, all the takeaways from minicamp. So I wanted to run through those and then answer a couple of fan questions for you guys, and then I'll be back talking with Dane Mizutani about the final OTA practices, and JJ McCarthy is scheduled to talk about what he thinks of his spring. We heard from Sam Darnold the other day, and Darnold told us stories about how he's learning the offense using poker chips to get the alignments right and practicing his dropbacks in his apartment and things like that. But it seems like Sam Darnold is feeling pretty comfortable with the Vikings offense. And so I'll run down all the different takeaways that I had. And I think it's a good place to start is right there with Sam Darnold and JJ McCarthy. We've talked a good amount about it, and so I don't have new information from that. But the big takeaway is just that Sam Darnold is clearly far and away QB1, and JJ McCarthy has been brought along quite slowly during this period. I will say, though, that Thursday's practice, the final minicamp practice, was actually a little more intense for JJ McCarthy. He got quite a bit more reps than he has before. They did some more hard, full speed type of 11-on-11, some red zone drills, things like that you might actually see in training camp. And I thought that JJ McCarthy handled himself pretty well. He had one very nice throw to Trent Sherfield that the team put out on their Twitter if you want to go see that. But overall, I don't think that there was anything that happened with JJ McCarthy to change our minds about where he stands. And that goes for whether you're talking about the fact that they have to develop him or the fact that he's also very talented. Like, you could see both of those things during this OTA and minicamp period, but it was very clear that Sam Darnold is QB1 heading into training camp. And I think we wanted to know during minicamp and during OTAs, where do they stand? Is it back and forth reps? Does it look like the Vikings want JJ McCarthy to win this job or start winning this job right away in minicamp? And instead, no, it was Sam Darnold, all the first team reps, working with all the starters day in and day out, and looking very comfortable in doing so. So we'll continue to watch that situation as it plays out in training camp, where we will get a much better sense when they have the full speed reps happening all the time. And then we can really say QB1, QB2, QB3, and so forth. We could get a sense of what that depth chart really is, because I don't think you really can in minicamp. Most of the time, even with rookies, when they put them over on the rookie field, that everybody wants to hear that the rookie looks like the best player ever during minicamp, but usually that is where they're trying to just get some things figured out and do a lot of teaching with that player, and it was no different for JJ McCarthy. So that's kind of the biggest overall takeaway. The thing that we were watching by far the most was, where is the quarterback situation going to start training camp? And I think we can easily say for sure that Sam Darnold begins training camp as the starting quarterback. And the first day of camp, he'll be running the 11-on-11s for the offense. But will JJ McCarthy be the second quarterback that's coming in there and getting a lot of work? And look, Nick Mullins also doesn't need a lot of work in comparison to JJ McCarthy, not just because he's the backup, but because he's a veteran. He's done this a long time. He knows the offense better than both of these guys. And so even the rep distribution won't fully tell us probably who's going to be the starter, the backup on day one. But if we see it play out through training camp, that JJ McCarthy starts making gains, starts putting good days together, and Sam Darnold maybe isn't as strong, then we could have a competition. As of this moment, I don't look at it as a quarterback competition in training camp. I'm seeing Sam Darnold as the starting quarterback and JJ McCarthy is the development rookie quarterback that they don't want to start right away, which they have said over and over and over. My mind can absolutely be changed, though, and that's why we'll go out to training camp every single day, is to see if my mind and their minds are changed about where JJ McCarthy stands. But everything that I saw from him, I would just describe as pretty normal for somebody who's never played in the NFL before. And if you read reports around the league, if you look at what the Patriots are saying about Drake May and so forth, you're going to get a lot of the same stuff, which is, well, some throws are being missed and the guy's still learning the offense. And you got to give him time and all that stuff. But you do see the arm talent from J.J. McCarthy and the athleticism and all those things that make him a promising first-round quarterback. It's just that we're not used to having to be this patient when it comes to something like this. But look, Teddy Bridgewater didn't start right away either in his first year, and he was young when he came out in college and somebody that needed some work. And then he got in the game and he had his moments in 2014. And maybe that's what this will look like. So I just can't say enough that we need to take a long-term approach to analyzing J.J. McCarthy and his development rather than trying to overreact to each practice or overreact to even what happens in the early part of training camp. You would like to see by the end of training camp the accuracy increase, the timing, the rhythm, and all those things. But I thought that even from the start of OTAs till the final day of practice, Thursday in minicamp, that he improved, and Thursday was his best practice by far. I thought, of all the OTAs and mini camps that we've seen. So even just a little bit of progress there. It's not something that just happens quickly or it clicks in and then suddenly he's just got it all. We're going to have to give it time. But for now, the biggest takeaway, of course, is that Sam Darnold is QB1 and has made a really strong first impression, I think, just in general on his teammates and with the way that he's run practice. And then we'll see where it goes from here. The other takeaway, of course, number 2 is Justin Jefferson's contract. But, since we've talked about that so much, I wanted to throw in a little nugget that maybe didn't come up too much as we were talking about how they negotiated Jefferson's contract and so forth, which was that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah talked about using different avenues and different, maybe structure to the way that Justin Jefferson's contract would be negotiated. And he talked about some of the delay was trying to figure out what that structure was going to be. And then once they could not come to some sort of agreement on that structure, then they said, all right, we're going to have to go another direction. And if I give you the exact quote here, it sounds like, and this is just a suspicion, it sounds like they were looking at a longer-term deal. And the Vikings have traditionally tried with their superstars to sign 5-year contracts. This one ends up being a 4-year extension. But the way that this played out, here's what Kwesi Adofo-Mensah said. He said, quote, "We exhausted our ways in one avenue and got to the point where we didn't think that was going to be done. So we had a conversation. Hey, let's try this other avenue. And once the other avenue, it became pretty clear that these deals for premier players are out there. There's a blueprint to go off that we're working with different things. I told his agent, I'm trying to build a championship team, so it's recognizing the player, but also structuring it in a way that we want to go over for a number of years was critical." So, I think that it just sounds like they wanted to go a little bit longer with Justin Jefferson, and they ended up going with 4 years instead of 5 years, and that's how you negotiate. It's, working through, here's what the team wants, here's what he wants, and they end up coming to the agreement to get that done. And I asked Kevin O'Connell how important it was to get this deal done before minicamp, and he said it just gets everybody going on the right path, gets a handful of reps banked with Sam Darnold and the offense. Not that we didn't think that Justin Jefferson could show up on the day before training camp and start going from there, or the day before the season and probably start going from there based on the type of shape that Justin Jefferson was in. But it does get him on the same page with Sam Darnold. It gets him in the meetings and the learning phases of what's going to be new with the offense and things like that. So, it was important for the Vikings to get that deal done with Jefferson by minicamp and have it all settled, There's no drama within the organization. As of right now, we know the Vikings can always find ways to create drama where there isn't any, but there's no drama with Jefferson. There's no distraction going into training camp, and everybody can just, focus on developing J.J. McCarthy, getting Aaron Jones involved, Jonathan Grenard, the defense, and the changes there that we're going to see. And there doesn't have to be this daily, what are the insiders saying about Justin Jefferson? What are the rumors? What are the, all the other nonsense? So that was important to the Vikings timing-wise to get that done. So, of course, Justin Jefferson, if we were doing a winners and losers of the OTA and minicamp period, clearly Justin Jefferson, the biggest winner with his $140 million contract. Next thing on my list, Blake Brandel and Dalton Risner, it appears, will battle for the left guard position. Blake Brandel, they said, O'Connell said specifically that they told him after last year, we want you to just focus on left guard. We don't want you to practice at left guard, right tackle, whatever, because he had been a swing player. We don't want that. We just want you to be the left guard. So they had plans, even though they wanted to bring back Dalton Risner, to have Blake Brandel fight for that position. And with offensive linemen, development is really challenging. And we saw that from someone like Garrett Bradbury over his first couple of years. He got benched at one point. His PFF grades were terrible. And then all of a sudden the light kind of came on. And that's not to say that Bradbury is an elite center at this point, but he's become a reliable, good NFL player, a solid NFL player. And it took 3 years in order for him to get there. Well, someone like Blake Brandel was drafted in the late rounds a couple years ago. He came in as a left tackle. He's worked at a couple different positions, played a little right guard last year in a game, maybe a couple games, played a little left tackle the year before when Christian Darrisaw got hurt. And now, after a couple years of development, he's ready to go. And I think that that's a typical path for a late round type of player if they have a chance to be a starter. And his size gives him an opportunity maybe to be an improvement in the run game, which is what they should really be looking for, because the run blocking was just not great last season from that position. They bring back Risner, though, as a just in case. So it's not entirely the Blake Brandel show. And they signed Risner to a contract that was similar or a little bit less than Blake Brandel. So it wasn't a starter contract. You're coming back at $12 million a year and go fourth here and be the starter. It was much more a competition type of signing for Dalton Risner, and it's a backup plan that provides you, I've talked about this before, a baseline or a bar to clear, that if the bar to clear is Dalton Risner, then that means Blake Brandel will have to look pretty good in training camp in order to get there. So if Brandel looks good in training camp, I assume he's going to play some preseason games and so forth, and they evaluate that and say, yes, he's better than Risner. Well, we know that Risner's an average starter in the NFL, and that would mean that they believe that Brandel is going to be average or better or an improvement in certain areas, and that competition will be kind of a daily who's taking the reps. I think Risner, I did not see this myself. Somebody mentioned, maybe Andrew Kramer, that Risner was taking some reps at right guard as well. I don't think there's a competition there, but it might speak to just Risner's role, if Brandel wins the job, could be a swing guard. And if you look at their backup line, this might be the first time ever we're talking about them having a good backup offensive line, with David Quessenberry, proven offensive tackles, played a lot of games. Dalton Risner could be a backup there. They drafted Walter Rouse. So they've actually got some depth. Dan Feeney, I should throw out there as well, has played a lot of games in the NFL and can be a decent fill-in type of player. So I think depth on the offensive line with 17 games has become even more important. It always was, but as you know, when you have a weak link system, you can't just drop off from a good player or a solid starter to someone who doesn't know how to play, which happened a couple times during the Zim era, where we saw them go from maybe an average right guard to suddenly Drew Samia or something like that, and it just got blasted over the right guard time and time again. You can't have someone who gets crushed at that position. You can survive it, most of the time, but not just someone who's getting beat over and over again. And if they have injuries this year, that won't happen based on the players they have. So they're looking for another development story that's good for them. They've got somebody like Josh Metellus, who was on the bench for a couple years, then steps into his role. Anthony Harris a few years ago, same kind of deal. And they're hoping that, Blake Brandel can become the same sort of thing. Next takeaway from me was that Jonathan Grenard has been a nice fit so far with the culture of the room. It just looks like he's fitting in. He's got all the guys doing these post-practice ab crunch things. But something else stuck out to me when I spoke with him the other day, just about his connection with Brian Flores. And he talked about how he really enjoyed the fact that the players could give feedback to Brian Flores. That, of course, the players aren't running the defense, but they can speak up in meetings. They could talk to Brian Flores about, like, hey, this isn't working, this is working, we want to change this, we want to change that, and Flores is willing to listen to that, so it comes out as this room that's got a bunch of high intelligence, experienced players all working together to form the Vikings defense. And Jonathan Grenard is a really good communicator, he's a great talker, and he just fits in right away. And I think when you're looking at outside free agents, you always wonder, well, how's the guy going to fit in personality-wise? And with someone like Jonathan Grenard, that personality fit seems to be there right away. I did look into Jonathan Grenard as far as trying to project him forward for this year, and his pressure rates and his sack amounts and so forth. And I will say that 12 and a half sacks last year was by far his career high, and his pressure rates and win rates by PFF data were not really reflective of someone who consistently is going to get 12 to 15 sacks. If he ends up getting 8 and he's a good pressure creator, he had 48 pressures last year, which is solid. The best guys have quite a bit more than that. I mean, Danielle Hunter might get 70 pressures in a year, and I know he's going to play more snaps and so forth, but someone like Hunter can create pressure a little more often. And so if we're trying to look at, Jonathan Grenard and where he should stand, maybe 12 and a half sacks is a little high of a bar for him, but to put him alongside Van Ginkel, Dallas Turner, I think they have a better overall group of pass rushers, and you could see it with Dallas Turner out there. Van Ginkel was still working on the side. He's recovering from an injury. He should be back for training camp. But with Dallas Turner out there, the depth of that position, though, is still a little bit spotty. We saw a lot of Andre Carter working in. Andre Carter doesn't look massively bigger to me than he did last year, but he's somebody who has that huge wingspan. He's got explosiveness and speed, big UDFA for them. And the fact that they haven't brought anybody else in suggests to me that they think that Andre Carter can handle a good percentage of that job. Patrick Jones is still doing his thing, still getting a lot of reps. Maybe some development there. Last year, by the number of snaps that he had, was one of the lowest rated PFF players with over 500 snaps on defense last year. That's a little concerning with Patrick Jones if they're going to have to go to him at some point, even if they do have more edge rushers. So I don't know if they'll go out and look for somebody before training camp. It's kind of last chance is the few weeks before training camp to pick up somebody. Maybe they do at that position. But Andre Carter getting a good amount of run for them right now. I talked about the winner of minicamp was Justin Jefferson because he made so much money. It's probably also Sam Darnold as well, being clear-cut as QB1. But I'll give you the other winner of minicamp, and that is Robert Tonyan. Robert Tonyan, who was a good receiving tight end for the Green Bay Packers for a number of years, had multiple 50-catch seasons, 17 touchdowns thrown from Aaron Rodgers to him while he was in Green Bay. Went to Chicago last year and just had a tough go of it. It did not work out very well at all for Robert Tonyan. I think he had 11 catches on 17 targets or something. Not a good passing offense, not a good quarterback. They already had Cole Kmet there, so he just didn't get a lot of work. And he comes here, does a workout. Wes Phillips says, yeah, we all just looked at him and said, we're going to sign him. Like, we're good to go with Robert Tonyan. And during minicamp, Johnny Munt obviously getting a lot of the work as somebody coming back in this offense, but Tonyan has fit in really well right away and looks extremely fast for the position. I mean, he's not the hugest tight end that I've ever seen. He's more of a receiving first type of tight end. and he was just catching everything and getting a ton of targets from Vikings quarterbacks. And I wouldn't be terribly surprised if he starts the season after the whole training camp as tight end 1, because he's more like TJ Hockenson than Johnny Mundt. Johnny Mundt has always been more of a blocking tight end, and Robert Tonyan is more of a receiving tight end, and it just shows. He has really good hands. He catches a lot of passes. I don't think we saw him drop anything, and looks very fast for a guy of his size. So I was impressed by Robert Tonyan, and it looks like somebody that has a great chance to make the team and even have an impact, and they could end up keeping 4 tight ends. It could end up being, we'll talk about N'Keal Harry in a second as one of the big takeaways, but him, Johnny Mundt, Josh Oliver, and of course TJ Hockenson. He's probably not going to start the season healthy and doesn't look like he's anywhere close, just walking on the side during minicamp. But we didn't see Nick Muse out there. Not sure what the injury is or the absence. They don't have to tell us during minicamp, and I don't think anyone asked. With all the commotion going on about Justin Jefferson's contract, the day that we spoke with, Kevin O'Connell, we didn't talk about, Nick Muse. So I don't have an answer to that. But it looks like Robert Tonyan has a great chance to make the team. Speaking of tight ends, N'Keal Harry is moving to tight end. We talked about it a little bit the other day, but I think it's interesting. Just maybe if he can make the team, gives them a little more depth. He has the skill set to do it. He has the size to do it. But this is one of those last chance in your career to make something in the NFL type of things for N'Keal Harry. And he might end up developing a little bit of tight end here and going somewhere else if Robert Tonyan is going to make it, because I have a tough time seeing enough room in the room for N'Keal Harry to end up making the 53-man roster. But now the fact that you can keep veterans on the practice squad, they might end up keeping him on the practice squad, but all of a sudden that is a very crowded room because I can't see Johnny Mundt or Josh Oliver going anywhere. And I know that they liked Nick Muse last year, so he's going to be in the mix as well. They signed an undrafted free agent who's kind of interesting, Trey Knox. There's a lot of bodies there at the tight end position, and I did think about maybe they will decide to use a little more 2 tight end stuff because of that. And they're going to want to run the ball better. And we heard about that last year with Oliver, and he got a fair number of snaps, but maybe there's a little more mix and match if Tonyan stays on the team after TJ Hockenson returns. Now we're looking, quite a bit farther down the road here, but you understand the point is that they will probably keep 4 tight ends, and I would imagine that they will use them. Ivan Pace Jr. looks like he's going to have the green dot. I don't want to say this definitively. The green dot, for those not, aware, is the defensive play caller. And last year when Jordan Hicks went down, you probably heard the green dot quite a few times because it was moved over to Ivan Pace. Now, Ivan Pace is a very quiet guy, so I think last year he had to kind of learn, like, hey, you can't be quiet, man. You're going to have to be loud if you're going to be that green dot. But he said that it was a great learning experience for him, and he started to understand how the entire defense all worked together and everyone's assignments and, how to communicate with his teammates and so forth. And so just the way that Kevin O'Connell answered the question, he said that Brian Flores is putting a lot on his plate, and we also want to have Blake Cashman and Camus Grugier-Hill ready to handle some of that green dot work, is the way that he put it, which insinuates to me that it's going to be, Ivan Pace Jr. as the guy who is the main defensive play caller. And I was just thinking about how funny it is that we quickly move on when someone is good. We go, all right, well, Ivan Pace Jr. is really good, and all right, on to the next guy. Is this guy going to be good? Is that guy going to be good? And we need to always kind of pull back and marvel at what Ivan Pace has done, because I can't remember somebody who, as an undrafted free agent, came in as quick as he did and all of the sudden took the job, and then by the middle of the year, he's the highest rated PFF linebacker among all rookies, and he's an impact player, he's a pass rusher, and then he's calling the defense. I mean, that is so much to ask for somebody who wasn't even drafted. I mean, that would be a lot to ask for a first-round linebacker. We've seen first-round linebackers need plenty of time before they can develop. I mean, look at someone like Patrick Queen with Baltimore. It took 3 years before he was putting up good PFF grades and was a centerpiece of their defense. And here's Ivan Pace Jr. doing it right away. So now he's just a leader and a very important piece going forward. And he could be a main part of Brian Flores' defense for a very long time. And I think it's a big step for him to be getting green dot opportunities here when they do have a veteran in Blake Cashman coming in. Next thing I have on the list, Shaq Griffin. I think he could actually change up the cornerback group. That this signing, my initial impression, and there's a long way to go here, but my initial impression was kind of, okay. And then people wanted to talk a lot about compensatory picks, which the Vikings say they did not give up a compensatory pick to get Shaq Griffin, that they never expected one. I don't know. We'll find out next year, I guess. But what they have for compensatory picks. But the way that there could be, or at least appears to be early on, a trickle-down effect from signing Shaq Griffin, which allows Byron Murphy to play inside more. We talked about it a lot. I even wrote an article about Byron Murphy playing in the nickel when they signed him, that was the plan because he had such better numbers in the nickel than he did on the outside throughout his career. And he's not the quickest. He's not someone that you can put one-on-one with top wide receivers all the time. So they played a lot of zone last year. But now Shaq Griffin is more of a man corner where they might be able to use more looks on defense. I mean, last year we gave all the credit that it deserved, but Brian Flores had to push every single button in order to make that defense work. And this year, it looks like he will have a little more opportunities to mix up coverages, maybe not have to blitz every other play with some of the more pass rushers. And that could be an underrated part of this as we look at how good this team could be is, can they get into the top 10? I don't think they have quite the talent to be in the top 5 defensively, and they have a tough schedule, but could they be in that range? Because last year they were solid in the NFL, an average defense with not average talent. And so I think Shaq Griffin could have an impact there. Him and Mekhi Blackmon playing on the outside, Byron Murphy inside. That gives you more flexibility with Josh Metellus. You can move Metellus back to the regular safety position, take Harrison Smith off the field sometimes to give him a little bit of a break. There's just more options now. And I think the signing of Shaq Griffin gives them a little more of a trickle-down effect where you're not asking a Caleb Evans to start every game. You're asking a Caleb Evans to be a solid guy off the bench. Andrew Booth Jr., we'll see. I haven't seen anything in minicamp that's going to change my mind about where he stands. I don't think right now that he's that high on the depth chart. It's going to have to be one of those things where he has a really good camp in order for him to make an impact. But as of right now, that cornerback group is pretty set, and it's quite a bit better than it was last year where Mekhi Blackmon was a rookie, and you had Juwan Williams starting out there at first, and then he loses the job. Caleb Evans ends up in there, and Evans did a good job for about half the season, but the longer it went on, the more teams figured out how to attack him, and it was a struggle at the end of the season. And the better receivers they faced, the more difficult it was. I think he's an NFL player, and I think he can be in the lineup if you need him to be. If you had 4 games where somebody was hurt, it's just that Shaq Griffin has been a longtime starter in the league, and they're hoping that he's more reliable than what they had last year. Next thing on my list is that Jerry Tillery could be a low-key signing for them that turns out to be something. He was taking all the first-team reps out there, him, Harrison Phillips. They brought back Jonathan Bullard, but they're looking for somebody who could create a handful of pressures. He's an enormous guy, former first-round draft pick. You could see the sort of physical specimen element, and with no physical play going on out on the field, I can't tell you whether he was winning his reps or not, but I can tell you that he was taking a lot of them, and that they've talked about him as somebody who might have a chance to kind of shift that defensive tackle group a little bit. I mean, last year, Harrison Phillips was playing way more snaps than he ever had. Jonathan Bullard was playing way more snaps than he had in many years since very early in his career, and they had nobody who could create real pressure from the interior. And Tillery, he had a good number of pressures last season as a rotational rusher. We're not talking about somebody who is a game changer, somebody who's your Grady Jarrett, your Chris Jones, but if we're talking about, better than what they had last year, just areas that they've improved on defense, I thought in minicamp overall, we could see where some of these signings that weren't that notable might end up making a difference as we go forward. Now, some of you have asked about Lewis Cine and what his status is going to be going forward. And as of right now, it doesn't look great for Lewis Cine because Theo Jackson had a very good minicamp. And these guys really seem to like Theo Jackson. He was a guy who was drafted in the late rounds by the Titans. And actually, when Lewis Cine got hurt, they signed him. Last year, he has to step in for a couple of plays against Philadelphia, gets an interception, becomes a rotational player, and has just pushed Lewis Cine down on that depth chart. And what it all seems to come down to with Brian Flores is, do you understand what you're supposed to do out there? Are you a high intelligence player who can read and react and make plays? And Theo Jackson has proven when he's been out there that he's capable of doing it. I don't think that they would want Theo Jackson to play 700 snaps, but as far as his fill-in and rotational role, he just seems to have a lot more trust than Lewis Cine does, and nothing has changed with Lewis Cine or Brian Asamoah or Andrew Booth Jr. That 2022 class was all playing with the backups out there, and I wouldn't expect any of that to change. The question is, do the Vikings want to move on from Lewis Cine to make a spot for somebody they're going to use, or do they give it one more year? And at this point, probably makes sense to move on. But, the fact that Cam Bynum is a free agent after this year, that might play into it. They might say, well, let's see one more year with Lewis Cine. But at some point, you've got too many players that you need to keep, and you might have other guys that you believe in as depth players and just want to say, all right, well, we're not going to keep 17 safeties. We're going to keep 16 instead and just move on from the guy who was inactive last year. And if you were projecting it right now, probably would have the same thing for this year. A lot of interest in the wide receivers. I will give you a name of an undrafted free agent who stuck out to me at minicamp, and then he could be cut tomorrow. And if he is, I apologize for shouting him out. But Jashawn Jones, who played a long time at Maryland, I'm sure Big Ten fans have seen him catch passes against the Gophers or whatever, had a good number of receptions last year. I've got it here. 56 catches for 790 yards. So had a good season last year. Dealt with a ton of injuries early in his college career, but he's kind of got that, like he's 6'1", he's probably 190 pounds, but he's got that natural athlete type of feel to him. And I think that stood out at minicamp. He had a lot of catches, had some nice plays, and just, if we're talking about run around in shorts, and it'll be a lot different when we get there. But if, the opportunity is there, it's possible that he could end up winning maybe a practice squad spot or something like that. We didn't see Jalen Nailor, by the way, which is just raises an eyebrow about whether Jalen Nailor is going to be that wide receiver 4. Clearly, Brandon Powell, wide receiver 3, and we're kind of running out of time a little bit to sign somebody else. I mean, they can do it before training camp, but then that person has to learn the entire offense, and it seems that they're just going to ride this out with the depth wide receivers or view Trent Sherfield as that signing. Sherfield had a great catch from J.J. McCarthy the other day, but it hasn't looked like he's been one of their top targets during this thing. Maybe during training camp, he can come together with the offense a little bit more. He's the new guy learning the offense and be an impact player. He hasn't been so far in his career, but, Brandon Powell wasn't either. Sometimes it is about fit. But the fact that Jalen Nailor, we didn't see him, again, similar to Nick Muse, we don't know. Like they don't have to announce an injury report, and we didn't ask about that yet. But not the greatest sign for Jalen Nailor if it is an injury that's keeping him out, because that's what kept him out all of last year. And the last thing that I have for my notes is that we have, folks, a very legitimate punting competition. Seth Vernon, the other punter that they brought in, was punting the heck out of the ball. Now, it was really windy out there, so maybe I could have punted it 50 yards in the wind. Probably not. But Ryan Wright and Seth Vernon were both letting it rip. The thing that makes me think the competition is very real is just simply the fact that Matt Daniels was honest about the struggles last year of Ryan Wright. He called it a sophomore slump for Ryan Wright. I would agree with him that his first year was very good, and then his second year, he dropped significantly in all of his key metrics for punters, and that opens the door for Seth Vernon. So they don't, they certainly don't wait around for punters to get it back together. It's, like if you struggle, like, they're going to look for somebody else. They're not going to hang around and say, oh, let's give them 3 more years of punting and see what happens. Like, they need that production right now. Ryan Wright looks like he's spent the offseason getting in shape, and maybe that's part of it. But Seth Vernon appears to be a really good athlete, played some wide receiver in college. And so at least if we're judging how they kick the ball, I was very impressed with Seth Vernon. But we're only talking about a handful of punts that we saw. So, I don't know. We'll see. But that competition feels very, very much real. Okay, let me get to a couple of questions that people had before we wrap up this Matt on the road in a random hotel room here podcast. Just running down the takeaways from minicamp. And if you missed any of the other episodes from Inside TCO Performance Center or the first ever Porch podcast, go back and listen to those. Those were fun conversations. And a lot of you thought that Dave Campbell was out of his absolute mind, not ranking Randy Moss as the number 1 Vikings wide receiver, or thinking that Justin Jefferson is already on his way to being that. And I agree with you. I think that Dave is crazy to say that. Randy Moss is, easily at the top of the heap. But, controversial Dave Campbell surprised me. But it was a really fun. We had him rank a bunch of stuff. It was a good thing for the first Porch podcast. I hope there's more of those in the future. A couple of questions here. One from a subscriber to the newsletter. Make sure you go check that out. PurpleInsider.com asks, now that Jefferson is locked up and they've got their rookie quarterback and revamped defense, when do we start looking at contract extensions for Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah? I would say still next year. I guess if they announced it tomorrow, it wouldn't be stunning or anything. But usually the way that it works with the Wilfs is when you get to the year before, through the year before your final year. So if it was indeed correct that they both got 4-year contracts when Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell were hired, then it would be next year would be going into year 4. So after this season, and it makes sense for them to give it another year and let it play out a little bit to see what they think of the overall direction. One thing we know is that the Wilfs are not okay with terrible performance. I don't know how many owners are totally cool with that, but I guess if you were tanking, in Chicago, you would be. But the Wilfs want to see a playoff team. They want to see this team in the mix and look like they're headed in the right direction. You can give it another year to see about the overall health of the organization, but I do think that every box that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell needed to check this offseason, they did, and that they have built up through this offseason a lot of trust, because you get to the end of last year and you go, okay, well, you've got a huge quarterback decision. You've got a Justin Jefferson contract. You've got a defense that clearly isn't good enough to actually take you anywhere yet, that showed some signs with Brian Flores, but needs improvement. So how are you going to juggle all these balls at once? And I thought Kwesi Adofo-Mensah ends up nailing it with drafting a quarterback without having to trade up, getting an impact edge rusher in the first round, then signing a couple of players to big contracts that were impact players on their teams last year in Van Ginkel, Jonathan Grenard, and filling out the defense pretty well. And then, ending up with Justin Jefferson's contract getting signed before any serious drama happened in training camp. No holdouts, no fines, no reports and rumors and things like that. I mean, just very well done for completing the plan, but you're going to want to see it out there on the field and see what it looks like next year. Not that I think if they won 6 games, they would fire everyone, but maybe the extension talks would be a little bit more tense and unless, if they won 9 games or 10 games, well, then it's a pretty easy decision. And as far as O'Connell goes, I think that the NFLPA survey giving him, I think it was an A+ or an A from the players. 2 years in a row, they have been one of the highest ranked teams as far as culture goes. And the way that the players feel about their coach matters a lot. Is he perfect? No. On game day, are we going to have criticisms? Yes. I think that he's still figuring out some things as an offensive play caller. Last year was really chaotic, and bad quarterbacks make all coaches look bad. But this will be the challenge this year of managing this Sam Darnold situation, developing J.J. McCarthy, and how does it look a long time from now? I mean, things change by the week in football, much less an entire season of new information. So I think that they will wait. If they did it, I wouldn't be against it. Sure, like extensions don't mean a whole heck of a lot because you just fire people whenever if you're the owner of teams. You see all the time, this guy got an extension, then got fired the next year. It happens. But as far as when they'll look at that, normally it would be after next year. And I could see them wanting to get a little more information before totally locking in Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. But I think as far as hires go, we go back to that, hey, they hired somebody and what's it going to look like? I don't think that they could have done much better than what they've done as of right now because they've gotten from point A to point B. They got a coach that is managing the locker room, that has a good passing offense that seems to work. And now, we go from here and see if they can actually take that from point A to point B and win games, because that's, the easy part is getting a team on the field that you've revamped and you've made in your vision. And the hard part is to put the final pieces on it. I remember my friend Eric Eager, who came on the show many times, he said something like, it's not that hard to go from, 5 wins to 8 wins or something, but 8 to 11 or 8 to 12 is very difficult. And that's what they're trying to do. And we're going to see how that plays out over the next 2 years. But as of right now, I think that both guys are deserving of that contract extension. All right, one more question. Ben says, would it be a bad thing if Darnold started the whole season if he was good or average? No, I don't think it would be a bad thing at all. In fact, I think it's totally fine. The J.J. McCarthy thing is going to be very intriguing, of course, that we're all going to be watching that really closely. Every step of the way, every amount of progress is going to be worthy of commenting on and reporting on with J.J. McCarthy. But if we all try to put our rational hats on, we can say if he sits the entire year and Sam Darnold has them in the playoff hunt come December, then this was a success. This idea was a success. And we'll go into training camp in 2025 expecting big things from J.J. McCarthy, but it's okay if he doesn't play very much. If he only gets into a couple of games here or there or starts the final game because they're either out of it or already in a playoff spot, that will be an okay result. And I also think that you want to see the Sam Darnold thing come together if you're the Vikings. You don't want to have this weekly Darnold's playing bad. Should they go to McCarthy? Like, you don't want to have that. You would much prefer that he's playing average football or good enough football to be in a lot of games. And, look, if they lose close games and they end up 7-10, well, okay. But you kind of want a little more than that. And if he's above average, then you can be in that playoff race. And that allows that McCarthy story to stay simmering on the bench rather than knocking at the door and having fans cheering, "We want McCarthy," or something like that inside US Bank Stadium. That's not really the outcome that you want. So I think that what you're talking about is what they're hoping for, which is that he is good or average, and that allows J.J. McCarthy to have no pressure to jump in right away. All right, there's your everything we learned at minicamp, and we'll hear from Dane Mizutani a little later in the week from the final OTA that I'm not able to attend. I had some things that I had to deal with on the road here, but everything's good. We're fine. So I appreciate everybody listening/watching, and we will catch you all very soon. Thanks, everybody. Football.